The Dark Blues come out on top in the derby, and there's a new leader in the Championship. And what's the state of play in the transfer window? Hello, I'm Charlotte Cohen, and this is the Scottish Football Podcast. All the news, views and analysis you need on Monday the 24th of August. And Dundee get the bragging rights after a derby win.
But Alan Forrest, it's in! It's in! Dundee go 2-0 in front! Alan Forrest got the touch towards goal!
Where does the result leave Stephen Pressley and Jim Goodwin's sides? And there's a surprise leader at the top of the Championship.
It's a goal for Stenhousemuir, Queen's Park 0, Stenhousemuir 1, and its substitute, Ewan O'Reilly, scored the winner against Motherwell. He's made an immediate impact here.
We'll take a look at the most intense league in Britain. And with only 10 days left of the transfer window, who's winning the window and what big moves are still to happen?
Back to Duran! Goal! Stunning! It is absolutely stunning from Celtic and from Camilo Duran in particular.
We've got everything you need to know covered right here.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
And alongside me to do so, I am joined by Scottish football writer Moira Gordon and former striker Rory Loy. Before we get into talking about the Dundee derby at the weekend, we have to give a moment for Stephen Pressley's tote bag. Moira, you were on the other week when we were singing Presley's praises. I mean, he is just such a character, and it's really hard not to be really endeared towards him. He's just so himself.
I was going to say that he just doesn't give a, in terms of what other people, he knows that there's going to be a bit of stick for it. He probably knows that there's going to get a bit of headlines or a bit of chatter, and he just quite likes it. He marches to the beat his own drum.
Yeah, refreshing to see. Well, let's talk about the football, because Rory, it wasn't a classic game. It was a little bit scrappy at times. I think Pressley admitting himself that they had a game plan and they didn't play to that game plan at all. But what he did say was, the grit and determination from his side was enough to win the game for him. And that's got to be a massive boost for him.
Yeah, I've been involved in derbies myself before, Dundee derbies, and sometimes the game plan doesn't quite go to plan. But ultimately, if you can find a way to get something from the game, ideally a win, then it doesn't really matter what you've worked on all week. I'm sure it was a source of frustration throughout the game at certain points, but I think overall, if you look at the stats, I'm not big on just looking at stats, but this is a game and an example of they were overwhelmingly positive in favour of Dundee United, but I don't think, I don't think overall many people can argue with the scoreline. They were clinical. Look like they've made some good signings. I know we'll get onto that later, but Bevan's very impressive. Finnegan as well. So he'll be absolutely delighted with the day's work. And 6 points from 9, and the 3 dropped were at Celtic Park, which, let's be honest, you're not always counting on.
Yeah, that statistics part that you mentioned is pretty much exactly what Jim Goodwin said in his post-match interview. He said, you look at the stats from the games that they've played so far, and he seems to think that the performances will lead to results soon enough, Moira. But how long do you think he can keep up not winning games and not being clinical and picking up points?
I think the fact that we're still very early in the season, one, that counts against him, because everybody wants to start on the front foot and be leading the charge, as it were. Nobody wants to be left behind as other people are picking up points, especially your city rivals. But it is still very early in the season, so he's got time to get it right. He's got time to try and get the players playing the way he wants and the team settling. But it will be a slight concern to him, not the performances, because some of the performances have been okay. They're still creating chances. But it's the fact they're not putting them away that'll concern them slightly. I think I saw a stat, we're talking about stats here, and I'm not huge in them either necessarily, but I think it was something like 46 shots on goal, and they've scored none of them in the last 3 games, which is actually, Rory will maybe tell me as a striker, that's not the sort of stats you want to see getting pinned up in the dressing room at any point or people talking about. So it's something that you don't want that to continue because that starts playing on people's minds. But while they're still creating them and it's still early days, they'll not be too concerned. And Jim's a guy that's been over the course before, so he's not going to panic. But it definitely doesn't help when your rivals have started brightly. That always magnifies the issues and the problems that you have within your own side.
Yeah, just to pick up on what Moira was saying about, being clinical and scoring goals, Rory, do you think that's something that's just going to come with time? I mean, you'll know yourself as a striker, the worst thing from your point of view is not scoring goals. So how do you think United fix that? Do you think it is just a case of waiting for things to click, or do you think there's something else?
Well, invariably, if you go through a spell of not scoring goals, it will be worked on in training, whether that's crossing and finishing, whether that's just finishing in general. However, the law of averages suggests if you do keep creating chances, one's going to go in off somebody's backside or somebody's head, or an own goal, or flying off somebody's shin at some point. However, really what you want is real clear-cut opportunities to be created through a specific way of playing. If Jim Goodwin feels that they're getting that, then the goals will come. I'm not sure they've got anyone too instinctive up the top end of the pitch in front of goal. Don't think they've had that since Dalby left. Dalby will sniff out a goal, he'll be in the right areas. I think with natural goal scorers, which are hard to find, Dalby was one of them, and he's doing it down south as well. You don't really need to coach it. If you're having to coach somebody to get into the right areas between the sticks, it probably doesn't come naturally to them, and it is instinctive in front of goal. So yeah, you can work on it all day long, but they need someone with that instinctive idea to get in the box, get between the sticks, and as I said before, when the ball does flash across the box, there's somebody there to put it in the net, because so many times I've seen Dundee United in the opening few games, the ball's flashing across the face of goal, the ball's getting whipped into the goals. You're never quite sure who's going to take the bull by the horns and go, I'm going to be the one that's going to score the goals. So, as I said, I feel for Jim Goodwin though, because I'm saying go out and get somebody who's going to be a natural finisher and score you goals, and that's very, very difficult to do. But they do need to get somebody, whether it's within their ranks already. Sapsford, I know, has got a goal in him, but I'm not convinced he's an out-and-out goal scorer. They need to get somebody to put the ball in the net, because you can't continue to if you don't score goals, then the best you can get is a draw at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. One of the other interesting parts from the game on Saturday was this VAR decision that we saw, which is part of the new rules that they've brought in. So there was a coming together between Finnegan and Yoro. Yoro was initially booked, VAR intervene. I think it's a case of mistaken identity. So they go back, they say Yoro shouldn't have been booked, and they book Finnegan instead. But Moira, I think a lot of people were very unhappy because they didn't feel like the challenge warranted a yellow card for anyone. But I think with this new rule, they had to swap the booking around.
That's it. It's a bizarre ruling, the fact that if you initially make that error, you have to give it to the other player, even if the other player hasn't fouled anyway. It just seems absolutely crazy. So it's basically they got the decision wrong twice. It was just as bonkers. And I actually feel really sorry for the referees, because he's the one that the players were given, a tight tit in the game because they were confused. And I mean, you could see that in Finnegan's face. A lot of the time you'll see players feigning innocence, but he genuinely was baffled by what was going on. And I don't think he was the only one. I think most of us watching it couldn't really understand. So for this ruling of mistaken identity to decide that if you have booked the wrong person, then the next person, the opposition person, has to get that yellow card in their place. It's almost like we're given a yellow card, so somebody has to get it, and it's wherever the music stops. Almost, it's absolutely crazy. And I feel for Finnegan, but I feel for the referee, because he was made to look really stupid. They made a mistake. It was a fairly understandable mistake in real time. I think a lot of people might have made that same error, whether it was a foul, whether he'd caught it, or whether it was a good tackle. But having seen it back, he should have been able to reverse the decision without compounding it by having to book somebody else and making it an even more bizarre decision.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this kind of plays out throughout the rest of the season.
How would you respond to that, Rory, if you got that booking?
Listen, I mean, I know Willie Collum goes round all the clubs before the season and talks them through the new rulings and things like that. And we in the media got to go as well. And he showed an example of that particular rule working really well. It was in the World Cup. A player, I mean, he dives. It's a horrendous dive. I can't quite remember who it was. I think it was against Argentina, believe it or not. And the referee is the wrong side of the play. He can't see through the body, and he gives a free kick. On inspecting the decision, it was a blatant dive. He takes the booking off the player and he books. So that's an example of it working really well. That at the weekend is a massive grey area, because as Moira says, I mean, what is he meant to do? He's running with the ball, dribbling, and the Dundee United players put his leg. As he's lifted his leg, the next place he naturally is going to put it. It's just, but as Moira says, you have that little bit of degree of empathy for the referee, because he's been marked, he's been scored on his job at the end of the day, and if that's the law and that's the ruling, then that's what he's got to do. But there's an element, if you do go back and just say it's not a foul to anyone, you're re-refereeing the game at that point. It's all a bit of a mess. As I said, there probably will be examples where it'll work well.
Yeah.
That wasn't one of them.
Yeah, it all became quite sticky, didn't it? Well, let's move on to the Championship, because we have a new team at the top of the table, Stenhousemuir. Rory, we know how difficult that division is, and they've just come up and made one hell of a start.
Yeah, can you imagine you opened with that sentence? If somebody told me you'd be open with that sentence a year ago, I don't think anyone would believe it. Top of the Championship. Credit to them as well. I have to say, Marvin Bartley going into that job, that's a difficult job to go into. And I know people will say, well, they're riding the crest of the wave, they're in the Championship, there's no expectations. If you're taking over from a manager who's been chopped down as Stenhousemuir's greatest ever manager, 9 times out of 10 you walk into a job where the team's struggling, as he did at Livingston, and even small bits of progress get praised, and you get a little bit of spotlight on you for that. But to go into a club that's doing so well and on the rise, to then continue that momentum, do so well in the League Cup. I mean, to finish top of their group, to knock out Motherwell, and to be sitting top of the Championship. I don't care how early on in the season it is. 2 or 3 games in, so what? You've got to enjoy it for what it is, and you've got to say that Marvin Bartley has went in and he's really stamped his own authority on it, and the fans and the players seem to have taken to his methods, and all power to him.
Yeah, it does feel, Moira, that the race for the title in the Championship this season could be really open and even more exciting than it has been.
I think that's the case. I think we've had a few seasons where it was always a tight race. There was always, peaks and troughs throughout it, but there were clear favourites maybe going into it, or 1 or 2 clubs that you thought would vie for it. This season it is a fairly open race, but I love the fact that it's a team that's come up, they've maintained that momentum. We've seen it before. Teams that maybe go down and people expect to do well, they're still licking wounds to a certain degree. The ones that come up are the ones that are feeling good about themselves. They've got a bit of momentum. They know how it feels to win and they enjoy it, so they don't want to give it up. So we often see them doing well, but it feels like it's more than just an early season, feel-good factor in this. It feels like there is something a little more substantial there, as Rory said, to see Marvin going in there and actually getting everybody buying into everything straight away as a new manager and getting everything moving in the right direction, and to do it in the cup, to do it over the league start as well. It shows that they've got something about them, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they go for the rest of the season.
Elsewhere, Livingston beat Dunfermline. Rory, have you been surprised by Dunfermline's kind of poorish start to this season? Because, they finished last season in the Scottish Cup final. I think Neil Lennon was pretty unhappy with their performance in the League Cup last 16 last week. But there was so much promise and so much probably expectation for them going into this term, and it's just kind of not quite clicking yet.
No, it hasn't. But echoing what Moira said about Jim Goodwin, I mean, Neil Lennon has been over the course and distance enough times to know that it's 2 or 3 games in. I expect the results when Livingston play Ayr United, when Dunfermline play Raith Rovers, and all the other teams in around that mix, Partick Thistle and Inverness, for example, going up there drawn, these teams will take points off each other all season, and Dunfermline will have their 2 or 3 weeks where they win 2 or 3 games and they'll pop back up and amongst the rest, and then they might go through a little dip. That will be the way the season goes. I do not see, yes, Partick Thistle might be favourites based probably on last year's experience and keeping a good bit of the squad together. That's probably giving them the edge and a good start as well. I don't see Partick Thistle going throughout the season without maybe going, winless for 2, 3, 4, 5 games. I'm not going to say they'll lose them all, but there's so many tricky fixtures in that league that if the confidence does dip or you get a couple of tough results, you might see yourself go a few weeks only gaining a point here and there. And I think that'll be the story of the season. I think it'll be nip and tuck all the way through till the spring next year. And good luck to anyone who tries to predict the outcome at the end of it. I know a few people are saying Partick Thistle. I wouldn't be better. I wouldn't be prepared to put a bet on at this point.
The thing is, these leagues is so tight and there isn't as much money there, so squads aren't as big. All it needs is one key injury to somebody or, suspensions at a pivotal week, and that's it. It would be madness to try and gamble on anybody finishing in any position virtually.
That's why we love it. Finally, let's talk transfers and have a look at how the window is going. Celtic, first of all, I mean, Rory, every player they've brought in so far seems to have been a success, but I think fans are still wanting more money spent in midfield and defence. I mean, do you feel like the squad is ready for competing potentially in Europe and domestically?
Well, based on the start to the season, if Duran can show anything like the form he's shown in the last couple of games over the course of the coming months, he scored his hat-trick at Kilmarnock. I still think he can be tidier on the ball and in general play and link-up play. Some of it's been good, some of it's been quite untidy. I think he'll grow into the role and I think he'll become pivotal to it. Bauer in midfield as well looks like a tidy football player. So you look at it overall, Charlotte, I think at this moment in time, they've got enough in the building to win domestic league for sure. I genuinely think Celtic have the potential to run away with the league this season. Now, that's not me saying that I think that Celtic have got the best squad, but for me, they had the best squad last season. They did have injuries, etc., and that came to the fore. This season, they've started well. They've got Martin O'Neill. They've got a foundation. They know where they're headed. They know where they're going. And that nucleus that they've brought in and they've spent money to do so, it just looks to me as if they are, still looking to recruit another player in midfield. Alistair Johnson's injured. I don't know what's going to happen on the back of that, whether he will move on or not. I think their business has been good. And that's not always something you could have said about Celtic. There's so many players, even recently, Adamu, Balakwisha, there's a long list of names, but they've started. Their hit rate so far from what we've seen looks excellent. And I don't think anyone will be close to them domestically. Whether it's 2 or 3 more signings, 1 or 2 more signings for the European stage, quite possibly. But they certainly made light work of Lask.
Very much so. What about Hearts, Moira? Because they're being so keenly watched by everyone, given the Jamestown rebuild. It looks like so far so good. I mean, the signings that they've brought in look to be coming onto a game at the moment.
I think there's still some frailties, but again, it depends on the manager. I think a lot will depend on Europe, whether they can actually get into the Conference League, whether they'll add more. Depending on that, I think also they're needing to clear out a lot. I think that's one of the biggest tasks they've got in this transfer window is actually offloading a number of players. They've got a massive squad, and it's going to be really difficult to keep that, keep everybody happy without fringe players unsettling things. I still think there's going to be some more signings, and again, a lot will depend on whether Braga stays. So there's still a few question marks about things at Tynecastle. And again, defensively, they're still needing to find something there. I'm not sure he's fine-tuned his midfield either, exactly what he wants. So it's about finding maybe a bit more in there that offers a bit more creativity in terms of a box-to-box kind of energy, rather than Renault's come in and he's got something about him there. But it's about finding backup. If they're going to end up playing on both fronts in terms of qualifying for the group stages, the Conference League, I think they will make a greater investment and there will be more players coming in. Because, as I say, even although it's a big squad, I think there's half of that, or a big chunk of that squad, they don't want to use their fringe now. They're welcome to go, and I think they'd rather bring in a few more players that where they're this season's fit with this season's style of play and this season's approach.
What about Rangers, Rory? Because they've spent a fair whack, had plenty new faces coming in the door. I've seen a couple move on as well, but I don't know, it just maybe doesn't feel like everything's quite clicking yet.
Lots of promise, and I think of lots of underwhelming performances, which has been the story of the last few seasons. When I sat and discussed this on Sportssound a few weeks ago, a lot of people were saying, at that moment in time, Rangers were favourites for the league, which you can understand when you build a logical debate, because Celtic hadn't signed anyone at that point other than Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. However, when you actually look at the history of the fact we have that conversation mid-June, start of July, end of July, every single season or every single year, and Rangers seem to do what they've done so often, bar one season over the last decade or so, that it's not a surprise. However, I did think there would be more of an edge to Rangers under Derek McInnes. Now, that may come, and it probably will come to a degree, not enough to topple Celtic, in my opinion, but I think it will come to a degree. I think he will instill a much stronger, tougher mentality than previous managers who have really struggled with that, and the players. I think he's got a track record of doing it. I know people will say it's a different beast being at Rangers as to the other clubs he's been at. However, I think he will rise to the demand and the expectation. However, unfortunately for him, you're judged against your city rivals, and I don't think his squad at this moment in time bears any resemblance to a team that could go and win a championship, which ultimately will be the goal over the next couple of years. So, yes, some of the signings, I mean, it's difficult to call because it is so early, but even the ones from last year, Charlotte, I'm still not sold on Ryan Nadiri. I think he works hard, but £3 million for working hard. He's industrious. He doesn't have a lot of quality. He just doesn't have a lot of quality, in my opinion, and that's, a relatively large sample size now that we've seen. Dan Neil in midfield just looks like another championship player. Joe Rothwell, who's come up from England and they've signed, and just struggles to get to grips with the way we play the game. And there's been too many of those. Fernandez's form will be a concern. I know we're talking about transfers, but I think if he'd started the season well, there could have been a big bid coming for him, but he's not. So it's really difficult. Chermiti's injury as well. They're going to need to bring another striker in. The fact that I'm going through a list off the top of my head here and could keep going and going and going just proves the point that there are many things, many fires that need put out at Rangers. The trouble they've got is if they take too long to do it, Celtic could be out of sight come the first international break.
That's the thing, isn't it? They've got so many new guys have come in, and we've talked so much about the fact that Derek understands what Rangers is about and what's needed. He's brought a couple of players in that, Ross McCrory and Lawrence Shankland, that understand Rangers and the demands of it. But there's been 11 signings there, and some of them don't look like they understand the pressures or can cope with the pressures of playing with Rangers already. And the pressure's only going to increase if they keep dawdling, because Celtic will extend their lead on it and the pressure is going to hyped up completely. I think if they can get somebody that can help, cut open defences or actually be that playmaker more to actually supply guys up front like Shankland, they might do something more about it. But at the moment, they look like they're struggling to cut through people to open up teams, and they're going to find that in the Premier League more than anybody. Celtic and Rangers usually come up against teams that'll sit back and banks the players to get through, and until they can find that kind of player that can cut through, I think it's going to be a struggle this season, isn't it? And the fans just won't put up with that as if Celtic continue to be explosive up front as they're looking at the moment and continue to extend their lead over them.
I think as well, with the best will in the world, we can sit here and we can say, struggling to cope with the demands of Rangers, don't know what they've come into. A lot of them aren't good enough.
Aye.
They might have the strongest mentality in the world. They might come up here and know exactly what to expect. For me, Ryan Nadiri is not good enough. Dan Neil doesn't look like he's going to be good enough to go and win a championship and wrestle it away from Celtic and consistently win cups. Cammy Devlin as well. Is he going to improve the squad to the point of getting to that? You could argue he was part of a Hearts squad that came so close, but so far he's not really looked up to it. Lawrence Shanklin's just looked a yard off it compared to his normal self. I do think he'll come good, in my opinion. He's got such a prowess in front of goals, but I just think that at this moment in time, with the best will in the world, as I said, there's too many players that just are not good enough to compete at the highest level that we have, which is Celtic.
Well, to finish up, I'll ask you both this. For who you think has done well this window and who you think still has work to do. Moira, I'll come to you first. Who do you think's done well so far in this window and who do you think still has a bit of work to do before it shuts?
I think when you look at the table, it doesn't necessarily lie. I think Celtic have made signings for so long. There's been this demand on them to find a striker or goals in their team, and I think they've done that. By the looks of it, on early evidence, they've found that goal threat. So I think they've done well, but I also think Dundee have done well. I think players, not even just this window, but the January window, that they've allowed to have time to come good, like Joe Bevan, but bringing in Owen Bevan this window, I think it has given them that foundation and defence to build on. So I think both those teams have done well in this window. Be fairly content. I think both of them will probably still want another few players, but I think at the moment they've got the early advantage. And I think Rangers still have work to do.
Yeah, Rory, what do you think?
It's a bit left field, this one, because they've not started particularly well. And, they did concede a couple of goals against Ayr, but there's a few players that the boy Eric Ring, I think, looks a good player out wide for Kilmarnock. I think I've seen him a couple of times now, and I think when the team get a bit of confidence and get a bit about them, which I think they will get, I do think that Neil McCann will probably look at tweaking the shape ever so slightly in midfield. They've brought a new centre back in, and if he hits the ground running and Robbie Dees can get up to the solid Premier League defender we all know he is, I think that Kilmarnock have the potential to start picking up points the way they were at the back end of last season. So a bit left field, but I'm prepared to take a risk on that one because I know they've not started all too well. Who's still got work to do? Well, I would imagine after the first few games, Jim Goodwin will be after a striker. As I said, he'll be, if he's listening to this, sitting in his car shouting, "Well, you think it's that easy?" And I know it's not that easy. But there's probably enough evidence there to suggest that even if you get a more focal point through the middle between the sticks, that it will allow other players to get into opportunities to get the ball into areas where he can make a difference. And it did work well for him. Don't want to keep going back to Dalby. It might not be somebody of that ilk or that quality, but I do think they need to get somebody in who looks more dangerous in front of goal.
I feel like that's always on a team's wish list, a goal scorer, isn't it? And it's just like the hardest position to fill. Well, that is all we've got time for. Many thanks to Moira and Rory, and thank you very much for listening. Remember, we are here with new episodes of the Scottish Football Podcast bright and early every day, so make sure you don't miss out. Subscribe on BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on in your phone. Thank you very much again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.